Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the second plenary session. Due to faster warming than in other regions of the world, subsoil users in Central Asia will have to implement climate change and water management strategies much earlier. To ensure the sustainability of mining and processing across the region, mining enterprises must develop water and climate management programs and integrate the best available practices and technologies. To encourage investment in renewable energy sources, local governments should provide long-term assurances and extended planning timelines.
Ваше превосходительство, дамы и господа, добро пожаловать на второе пленарное заседание. Из-за более быстрого потепления, чем в других регионах мира, недропользователям в Центральной Азии придется намного раньше внедрить стратегии в области климатических изменений и экономии водных ресурсов. Чтобы обеспечить устойчивость добычи и переработки ископаемых в регионе, предприятия горнодобывающей промышленности должны развивать программы управления энергетическими и водными ресурсами, интегрируя лучшие доступные практики и технологии при создании замкнутых водных систем.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to welcome you to this session in which we will discuss the energy, water, and climate change management. Natural resource sustainability, climate change, and green energy transition have become common discussion subjects by ordinary citizens as well as by professionals and research scientists. To tackle these topics, we have a selection of distinguished speakers, and we start our talk by Mr. Luc Mackle, who is an economist and policy analyst of the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Luc Mackle. I'm an economist and a policy analyst with the OECD. First of all, I would like to say a very heartfelt thank you for the opportunity to speak today and to be present at MINEX 2024. It's a real honor and a real pleasure to be back in Bishkek. I want to do a couple of things with this intervention. The first is to give a little bit of a sense of what it is that we're doing at the OECD, and particularly the Sustainable Infrastructure Programme for Asia, on the topics around decarbonisation in the mining sector, to sketch a little bit how we see the issue and the opportunities as well in Central Asia, and then to maybe conclude with what some of the kind of solutions might be and what this means for policymakers. So just for a little bit of context, the OECD has worked in Central Asia for many years, both directly on the mining sector and more broadly on private sector development, industrial development in general, and that was something that my colleague Pauline mentioned earlier. In our program, which is a Sustainable Infrastructure Program in Asia, SIPA, we really look at issues around decarbonisation in industry in general, and mining in particular, across three areas that are of particular relevance to today's conversations. The first is looking at how to integrate some of these low carbon considerations into policy planning, into infrastructure development. The second is to take a slightly more sectoral, technology-specific approach to some of the challenges in different hard-to-abate industrial sectors. And the third, and very importantly, is to retain an emphasis on growth. And this is something that we try and make sure is integrated into all our thinking, to retain a clear emphasis on how to make sure that this thinking around decarbonisation is coherent with the region's growth agendas. So just a few caveats before I move on. The first is to say that some of the things I'll discuss in the interest of striking a balance between our policy makers and our industry representatives will be specific to the mining sector, and some will be more generally on industry decarbonisation. So To kind of maybe set the scene a little bit, I'd like to give a couple of basic observations or some stylized facts as how we see decarbonisation in the mining sector, where some of the challenges are, some of the opportunities are in Central Asia. Now, the first thing is to say that all the countries in the region have ambitions to develop their mining sectors. This is something we heard earlier. It's something which is an integral part of many of the countries in the region's growth agendas. So mining growth is an integral part of much of the thinking around how to develop the industrial base and how to develop socioeconomic development more broadly. Now, these ambitions are long-standing. They're not particularly recent, but of course, there has been perhaps a redoubled, a renewed interest in this in the context of the green transition, in the context of critical rare minerals, has added a new focus onto the development of the mining sector and the mineral processing sector more generally in Central Asia. So there is this linkage between kind of decarbonisation at a global level and the interest in the mining sector in Central Asia, and this is something to bear in mind. But of course, the mining sector and mineral processing is a very energy-intensive area of industrial activity. It's emissions intensive. We heard earlier about some of the broader environmental challenges. And it is also particularly hard to abate. And by this, what I mean is that there is a limitation to the extent to which we can use electrification to address some of the emissions issues, carbon emission issues in the mining sector and in the minerals industry. So what does that mean? Well, it means that should the countries pursue this development of the mining sector in Central Asia under a business as usual scenario, it implies a concomitant growth of emissions from this sector and these and the value chains that are attached to it, both from Scope 1, Scope 2 and Scope 3 emissions, and I'll come back to that in terms of what that means for policymakers going forward. So we have this ambition to develop the mining sector and the mineral processing. We have the fact that it's a particularly hard to abate industrial sector, and at the same time we have a situation where all the countries in the region have clear climate commitments. They're all committed to reducing their greenhouse gas emissions. So the question then is how to square this circle, how to have both this sustainable growth of the mining sector in a way which is coherent with the region's climate ambitions. And this is something that we're trying to look at and think about from policy-making perspective. So this obviously isn't a challenge which is unique to Central Asia. This is something we're discussing in the OECD context, how to reconcile economic growth with the lowering of emissions intensity. But the starting point for the conversation in Central Asia is of course different, and this is any country has a different starting point, and this is going to depend on the economic structure, it's going to depend on the infrastructure legacy issues, it's going to depend on the connectivity questions that we heard about earlier from the Ambassador of the United States, it's going to depend on issues around the financing constraints, and all that contributes to a situation where in Central Asia, the starting point is difficult to deal with this question. And I would like to just draw attention to two kind of, again, stylized data points to highlight this. And just to be clear, this is speaking about the whole economy and not specific to the mining sector, but is of relevance. And the first thing I would like to draw attention to is what we refer to in the OECD as the CO2, the carbon productivity of growth. And what we see is that across the OECD, generally speaking, and so by this what I mean is how much output one can expect to get from your economy based on how many kilograms, 1 kilogram of CO2 emitted into the atmosphere. And across the OECD, it's the average is about $5. So for every kilogram of CO2 I emit into the atmosphere, I can expect to get $5.18 to be specific, is the OECD average. In Central Asia, it's half of that, right? So it takes more carbon to produce the same amount of output. So that's one thing to bear in mind. Similarly, when we look at the question of energy intensity, so the indicator I would use here is how much output I can get for every ton of oil equivalent that I use in my economy. When you look at the OECD, and again, these are very different contexts, but just to illustrate it, you can expect to get about $11,000 of output for every ton of oil equivalent that you use. In Central Asia, it's about half that. So it takes more energy to produce the same amount of output across the OECD. So this is the starting point that we're looking at these conversations around decarbonisation and these hard-to-abate sectors which are growing. This is the context. So what does that tell us and what does that mean for the region when we're thinking about the decarbonisation of mining and the decarbonisation of the value chains that we're looking to develop alongside it? If you remember earlier, I mentioned this business as usual scenario. Well, it means modifying the business as usual scenario across different stages of the mining sector's value chains and emissions. First thing to highlight here is efficiency. We spoke about efficiency, spoke about energy efficiency. There's a lot more that can still be done here in the mining sector, and this is about process efficiency, and it's also often these items that are at what we refer on the kind of the marginal abatement cost curve at the lower end of these things. These are interventions that, generally speaking, are not particularly capital intensive and which can be done now with certain no-regrets policies. So there's issues around energy intensity and efficiency. There is also the question around Scope 2 emissions. So this is the power that I use for my mine, the power I use for the minerals processing, and the extent to which it's carbon intensive or not, right? So the extent to which electrification, for example, can be a viable source of decarbonisation of mining and the metallurgical sector is going to depend on the extent to which I decarbonise the power sector. So we have to be thinking here about, when we're looking at the development of the mining sector, developing of these mineral value chains, to what extent that development is bearing in mind and looking at the associated issue of power sector decarbonisation. Obviously, there's a limit to what you can do at the firm level about that, although there's been a lot of images on the screens about co-located renewable infrastructure. So when you don't necessarily have the opportunity to draw on the grid for renewable energy, what are the incentives to develop co-located renewables alongside it? So that's one part of it. And then you get to the harder part, which is these hard-to-abate emissions. And this is something that we're really looking at intensely in the context of the OECD. And I think it's important to emphasize this is difficult. And these hard-to-abate emissions are those emissions that even with electrification, it's difficult to address. And here we're looking at things around whether it's fuel switching, the use of hydrogen, the use of carbon capture and storage, a set of technologies that are at different stages of commercial readiness, but which will become more and more available over the coming years. The question then is, under what economic conditions does it make sense for firms in Central Asia that are developing mining to invest in these particular solutions? And that depends in large part on what the framework conditions are. And by that I mean, where is my incentive to invest in this over the business as usual scenario? And that depends on things like effective carbon pricing, incentives in the fiscal framework, incentives in the investment framework, all pushing the investment decision towards these lower carbon outcomes. And this is something which is at an early stage of development in Central Asia, but where there is movement nevertheless. And often what we see is that there are a smattering of these incentives and these policies across the regulatory and policy framework, but not applied in any particular strategically coherent way. So there is movement in this direction, but there's still a lot of scope to be done here. So to conclude, we have this trend, something we want to support. It supports the diversification agenda, it supports the socioeconomic development agenda. We have an interest from the OECD in supporting the region with its critical minerals. We want to see it happen in a way which is coherent with the region's carbon reduction emission agenda. We have some technology options which are going to depend on the framework conditions that are present in the country, that are at different stages of readiness. And then there are maybe 4 areas of policy that I think already governments can start looking at with a kind of no-regret approach to this, to thinking, how can we start laying the groundwork for this change in the mining sector and putting it on a more sustainable footing? The first is to go back to this question around the investment framework, particularly FDI. Unlocking FDI, unlocking external finance is critical to getting these opportunities off the ground. So there's an opportunity here for the governments of the region to think, how can I best direct this through my investment policy framework towards lower carbon outcomes? The second thing is building in some of these low carbon considerations into the industrial and infrastructure planning. So here we're thinking about when you're looking at what's the vision for the mineral sector in Central Asia over the next 20 years, to what extent can we make sure that the decisions taken now that are going to direct investment in infrastructure put that industry on a sustainable, low-carbon footing in the years ahead, minimise the risk of stranded assets, and basically lead it to be competitive and sustainable in the future, because these things are going to be increasingly interlinked. The last two things is establishing the framework conditions for investment domestically in the industrials, in the low-carbon transformation of industry. So these are things around carbon pricing, the other kind of fiscal incentives for investment. And the last thing is ensuring that the domestic industrial ecosystem, all the suppliers, all the SMEs that are going to take part in this or have to take part in this for it to be inclusive, have the capabilities, the technology, the knowledge to take part in this process are not left behind. So I would conclude by saying that I think already we can see some areas for progress, for areas for work, and that can hopefully put this very important area of development on a more sustainable low-carbon footing. And with that, I will conclude. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Luke, for such an excellent talk about the delicate balance between the ambitious program of government for developing and growth in the mining industry and the need for decarbonizations and sustainability, and how the energy efficiency in Central Asia compared to the rest of the world. There is a clear need for improvement there, and the challenge is great. Our next speaker is Mr. Yerlan Ramazanov, Associate Director, Regional Head, Energy, Eurasia, Middle East, Africa, of the European Bank of Reconstruction and Development. He'll be talking about why coal is the wrong path on long-term energy security in the country. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I think that we're still in the morning territory, so therefore, Kutmantan, Urmatu Aymdarjan and Murzalar, dear Elchi, the Ambassador, Your Excellency. Dear ladies and gentlemen, to be honest, I do still remember participating to the very first mining conference back in 2010. And I don't know if Arthur is here in the room, but I want to congratulate Arthur and his excellent team with this 10th Mining Central Asia conference, and thank you very much for inviting me again to this forum, and it's really such a pleasure to be back into the mining community. To be honest, from my side, my career path is quite relevant to the theme I will be talking about today. It's effectively the energy transition. And today, we will be speaking about why not to invest coal, because it was the question, to be honest, when we discussed with Arthur what would be the theme of my presentation today. Take into account that my slides are in English and trying to cover the whole audience with the direct messaging. Let me now switch into Russian and continue in Russian. So, почему не инвестировать в уголь?
So with their permission, let me continue. English is said, why not to invest into coal mining? Coal is a widespread material, or the raw material. And of course, it is clear that governments are interested to utilize all available natural resources on the territory of these countries. But now, let us see the consequences of coal mining. Taking into account the culture of nomads or nomadic culture, we have to pay attention to ecosystems we habit, or in terms of habitation. If you search at any searcher, you can find a lot of information. And on the slide, I have some keynotes, for instance, that in 2023, the Kyrgyz Republic ranked 18th globally in terms of PM 2.5 concentration, which is 5-7 times above WHO recommendations. This is what we breathe with. I know that most don't live in Bishkek, but a majority others live in Bishkek, and that impacts our health. Furthermore, from 2010 to 2019, an average of 4,000 deaths per year and in particular 13 of total annual deaths were linked to air pollution in the Kyrgyz Republic, according to the World Bank. It is useless to continue. Why? Because first of all we have to talk about the health and well-being of the population and people behind. And the World Bank succeeded in converting into monetary assets those pollutions. Annually, World Bank assesses the air pollution in terms of monetization. And we mean not only emission to the atmosphere, we have to also keep in mind the ash or cinder. Second, Kyrgyzstan has joined and made its commitments to Paris agreements to reduce greenhouse emissions. On the slide, you can see the numbers. However, it leads to reputational risk from backtracking Paris Agreement and national commitments made on international agenda. Now, according to International Energy Agency, and as of last decade or years, every dollar invested to fossil fuels, we have $1.8 invested into green energy. In other words, for every USD, $1 spent on fossil fuels, USD 1.5 is now being spent on green energy. 5 years ago, this ratio was 1.1. Adverse impact on the carbon adjustment mechanisms. So most countries now shifting from investing into fossil fuels, and it has economic justification. We often assess carbon, now we are assessing so-called the carbon risk and the blocking risk, as said. It means by investing into coal generation, country, in fact, or a country blocks money, in other words, budget assets. On international capital market, today we have very limited assets or capital resources. It means same as BRM, we have stopped investing within 15 years, and from January 2023, 100% of bank loans must comply with Paris Agreement provisions. China, the closest country to Kyrgyzstan, banned export of coal mining equipment or machinery. In other words, it will be difficult to procure that machines or equipment. Financing will be problematic. However, yes, it will be expensive, and it will be a burden to the budget if a government decides to procure, and it will take a long time. However, by investing into solar panels or wind panels, so you invest, and in terms of periods for solar panels construction, it will take 1 year, or wind, it may take 2-3 years. However, for the coal financing, it might be challenging. If you plan to invest into solar renewables, then you will have a long queue of investors, both international investors and private investments. It means no burden of expenditures for the budget, so they can simply get revenues from the business activities of those companies willing to invest into solar or wind. In the bottom line, you can see
с точки зрения себестоимости,
that in terms of
даже
net
с учетом
cost
того, что солнце, ветер, они не постоянные
and
выработки, то есть, как
even-
энергетики говорят, они энергию кирпичом не выдают,
even given the fact that
становится дешевле.
sun or solar energy or
Оно
wind
уже
energy
становится дешевле,
still
соответственно, есть ли смысл инвестировать что-то дорогое,
is cheaper,
и при этом нужно
despite
оценивать
it's
о
not
том, что
sustainable
тренд идет на то,
in terms of
что
energy production. However, there is a
стоимость
trend
будет уменьшаться. И для
that the
примера,
trend or there is a tendency towards a decrease in terms. I'm not the finances, but last year we had auctions in Kazakhstan where wind projects had a ratio of 1.5 cents up to 2 cents per kilowatt,
при том, что угольная
where in the
электроэнергия
coal energy production
на капекс, чтобы покрыть расходы на строительство, она где-то будет
covered only capex with a cost of 4 or 5 cents.
достаточно простая,
In my opinion, it's a very simple economy,
критикуешь,
economics,
да, это стандартная, наверное, вещь. И
but
здесь
it's easy to criticize. However,
что мы предлагаем со своей стороны?
we have to offer something then. What we offer,
Сиди уже сейчас сказал, что
as my colleague from OECD has mentioned,
они углерода, интенсивность использования углерода,
there is a high carbon intensive use of resources is high in Central Asia, even compared with an global average.
самая чистая электроэнергия,
That
это та, которая не производится.
purest energy which has never been produced. There is a saying, and much can be done in terms of energy efficiency. Second,
Инвестиции в сети.
investments
Соответственно, со
to
своей стороны
networks.
мы активно инвестируем,
From our side, EBRD
неделю назад
actively invests into such projects. Just a week ago, we have signed an agreement to modernize 2 HPPs in the Kyrgyz Republic,
по установке умных счетчиков на распред
including smart meters
необходимо инвестировать
installation.
для того, чтобы
So what I want to say is there is a need, and we have to invest into such projects and to start new productions and to connect to new energy generation facilities. And of course, the third,
со стороны ЕБРР
to renewables. EBRD continues supporting the government of the Kyrgyz Republic.
и сейчас активно
We have recently signed an MOU with the government, and soon we'll call for bids to find or hire a consultant
competitive tender, конкурентные
to draft
тендер
competitive bidding documents
установки ветростанций.
to install wind stations.
С ветрозамерами, с
EBRD will finance wind measurements and social impact.
Поэтому все эти вещи, они возможны со своей стороны. Мы
And as you can see, all those efforts are possible.
Основное, наверное, чтобы подвести уже итог, уголь это
Maybe
дело
to wrap up,
вчерашнего дня.
coal is a question of yesterday or even the day after yesterday. And now,
Инвестиционные решения,
by taking investment decisions, in particular in mining or energy, where investment decisions are made with a focus on 20 or 30, 40 years horizon. Today, however, now,
обстановка,
we have to account for requirements and the situation
поэтому вывод простой, нужно инвестировать в зеленые проекты.
can become urgent or in demand after 40 years. Thank you so much for your attention, and I'm ready to answer your questions.
Thank you very much, Yerlan, for this detailed presentation about shifting trend from investing in coal to renewable energy, and in response to international regulations and agreements. I think the use of coal and the impact on air quality, obviously, and human health is obvious, and anybody who has visited cities where coal power stations are still operational, like I could give an example like Almaty, when the air circulation is very good. It's really, you can feel it. I hope the BRD support to mining sector will be a good incentive for this green energy transition. Our next speaker is Samat Nasirdinov, Deputy Minister of Ministry of Water Resource, Agriculture and Processing Industry of the Kyrgyz Republic. He will be talking about carbon sequestration through climate investment. in forests and pastures in the Kyrgyz Republic.
Good day, dear colleagues and participants of the forum. Today, I would like to underline the importance of sequestration of carbon, including NDCs of the Kyrgyz Republic in line with Paris agreements. It urges the country to reduce gas emissions up to 37% up to 2050 through international assistance. Let me share some words about sequestration project. Carbon sequestration through climate investments into forests and pasture lands has been adopted at the 24th meeting of the Green Fund Council in Songdo, South Korea. A project agreement with FAO and with the cabinet of the ministers of the Kyrgyz Republic was signed on the 4th March 2022 in Bishkek and ratified by the parliament. The project will facilitate and improve pasture and forest management on local and national levels and sustainable management of natural resources through improving integrated approaches. Agreement fund allocated grant from the government, FAO, ARIS and the Russian Kyrgyz Fund. The goal of the project to facilitate the economic development through lower or reduced carbon emissions and sustainable climate actions by improving benefits and mitigating risk disasters. A total of 19 million tons of CO2 will be sequestrated, equivalent to 20 years. Those reductions will total 7.6% of total emissions in the country and 22.6% of agricultural emissions, which will be a part of NDCs of the Kyrgyz Republic. The objectives of the project to increase the sequestration of carbon through climate investments into forests and pasture lands and mitigation of emissions through institutional support based on sustainable natural resources management and environmental-oriented growth. FAO, the Ministry of Water Resources, Forest Agency under the Ministry of Emergency, Kyrgyz Russian Development Fund, and Investment Agency of the Kyrgyz Republic are implementing agencies to coordinate the project implementation. At the same time, those state agencies and organizations are co-financing organizations. Target oblasts and rayons, so Jalalabad, Suzak, Togustoro, Narin, Osh, and Uzgen. Project schedule 24 to 30. The project comprises from 3 components. As you see, first component is strengthen the natural resources management and evidence-based data. Component 2 are green investments into forests and pastures and value added to resilience. Low production pastures. On the slide, you can see the areas or the lands with the low yield capacity, which totals almost 14,000 hectares. As a part of the project, we plan to improve pasture management on an area of 614,000 hectares, which will ensure carbon sequestration up to 14 million tons So 1 hectare of pasture must sequester 23 tons per hectare, in other words. The ministry continues to support those initiatives and attract investments. We are confident that only by joint efforts we can ensure climate actions and to preserve the environment as before. Drought irrigation will also be implemented on a low yield areas, including multi-year crops and trees, with an account of 1 hectare. For 1 hectare is about $1,500. Dear participants of MINEX 2024, the Ministry of Natural Resources, Agriculture and Processing invites all mining companies to participate and be engaged into the ministry's efforts in carbon sequestration. We urge you to introduce green technologies, skills and practices and work together to mitigate and reduce footprint. Your engagement is a key so we can achieve our environmental goals, and we rely on your active support and engagement. Together, we can create sustainable future for future generation. Please join us in this important initiative and let's work together to develop environmental resilient economies. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Samad, for such interesting talk about one of the tools and technique contributing to mitigate climate change and impact. It's great to see this being implemented in Kyrgyzstan and incentives put in place. Our next speaker is Asel Raimukova, Deputy of Minister, Ministry of Natural Resource, Ecology and Technical Supervision of the Kyrgyz Republic. She'll be talking about environmental aspect of mining activities. Thank you.
Dear Chair, thank you. Dear participants, dear ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I would like to welcome all participants of MINEX 24 Forum and to share my presentation on environmental policy and regulations in mining. Ministry of Natural Resources, Environment and Technical Supervision is the inline ministry of the government, which is in charge to implement public policy and coordination in environmental protection, ecology, geology and subsoil use. Today's scales of mining is characterized by intensive use of natural resources, an increase of waste and deterioration of air quality. Because of that, we pay more and more attention to economically justified and safe functioning of mining companies and enterprises. Today, mining and processing of natural resources is done now by more than 100 companies, from which Kumtor Company, Kyrgyzaltyn, Full Gold Company, Kaz Minerals, Alliance, Altain are the leading companies in mining sector of the country. Extraction of natural resources and their processing, of course, it negatively contributes in the loss of biodiversity. Processing deposits or the mining sites impact the environment, of course, atmosphere, air, ground, underground water resources, deformation of the earth, so-called depressions. Mining activities are carried out on high mountainous areas and vulnerable ecosystems is a factor of concern. Pollution of natural ecosystems, habitat of flora and fauna, reduction of biodiversity. The nature and its components are of national welfare of the Kyrgyz Republic and the wellness, one of the key factors of economic development. Right to sustainable, healthy environment is reflected in the constitution of Kyrgyzstan as a right to environment for health, and it urges us to care about flora and fauna. The constitution also provides that earth, land and natural resources are the base of the people living in the Kyrgyz Republic to support and maintain unique environmental system. Sustainable development is supervised by the government and state. In the Kyrgyz Republic, the environmental protection is regulated
by several laws, including law on environmental protection, on environmental expertise, which is review, and other laws and sub-laws. Currently, there are works on improvement of existing and development of new legal acts. Main areas of improvement of legislation is transition to international standards for air quality, environmental insurance, ecological audit, environmental audit, application of contemporary methodology of calculating contamination from industrial activity. Kyrgyz Republic now pays high attention to international cooperation issues aimed at effective interaction with foreign countries on implementation of multilateral and bilateral agreements in the area of environment protection and rational use of natural resources. Being a member partner to 13 conventions and 3 protocols, Kyrgyzstan have been included into the world process of ecological activity and has become a fully pledged member of world community and has the right to accept technical support from developed country, have opportunity to implement contemporary up-to-date technology of production and develop non-traditional forms of energy production and industry. Since objects of mining and processing industry is located in a non-touched by anthropogenic activity area, in mountainous area, it is important to properly evaluate impact on environment. That should be mandatory procedure and integral part of development of documentation, project documentation at all stages. Ecological hazard, ecological risk consideration must be considered. And any impact or directly, indirectly causing to the environment must pass through the state expertise, which is state national review. Apart from the national or state expertise, there is also a public review and independent review. So public review is a unique opportunity to study documentation on impact on environment. And the practice, this is both public monitoring, or which is non-governmental monitoring, and non-governmental review is actually done quite rarely. And this is activity implemented in the Kyrgyz Republic now. In terms of ensuring safety and ecological safety and to meet necessary requirements, certain licenses and norms are set by the Ministry of Environment Protection. This is approach implemented through single window approach, to give permits licensing and give necessary limitations to the companies, which allow companies to get get all necessary paperwork. Also, this refers to the right of temporary storage, utilization, or processing, or recycling, and burial or limitation of waste, including toxic materials and substances. There are also norms of impacting environment at a certain level. So the government of the Kyrgyz Republic set norms, normatives of levels and maximum admissible concentrations in atmospheric air, water, soil, and concentrations and norms that have been set and developed. There are also norms of payment for the use of natural resources, for contaminants, for placement of waste, and for economics incentives and to recover the cost for protection of natural resources, a payment for use of surface waters have been introduced recently. But in fact, for 2023, about $4,330,000 have been collected for the use of surface water and in resource development. The ministry has performed a supervision, both technical supervision and environmental supervision, to meet all necessary safety, industrial safety and labor safety requirements. Also, we conduct monitoring of environment, including atmospheric air. Apart from the legislation and limitations, additional measures are required. In an improvement of legislation is required, including installation and development of laboratory as up-to-date laboratories, because quite often monitoring and all activities are now limited for payment by the companies just for the use of resources and for contamination. But this also brings potential threats and hazards to ecosystems that a lot of local people are quite often concerned that their pastures, lands and water could be contaminated, and therefore Ministry of now insists on taking additional measures on developing systematic approach to conduct a number of consultations between local communities, state authorities, for participation of local communities, meaningful participation into any decisions taken on subsoil use. Activities need to follow principle of rational use of resources, conduct necessary protection activities, and this requires modernization of equipment with up-to-date capacity. It is necessary to ensure proper approaches, proper treatment facilities, proper waste management, application of highly technological and ecologically safe equipment, and that could contribute to decrease a considerably anthropogenic impact of industry for atmospheric air in order to protect ecological balance in the nature and to ensure reproduction. It is necessary to perform recultivation, restoration and rehabilitation of lands, and also it is necessary to timely present reporting from mining companies. Mining industry in Kyrgyzstan is one of potentially very important and parts of economy, and it is necessary to reform this approach and the system to meet all commitments. Dear participants of the forum, effective management of natural resources requires a very distinct balance between the needs and needs and development of economy and protection of natural resources. It is in order to develop healthy relationship between the people and environment, we need to ensure that integrated and contemporary approaches, including economic, social, cultural elements, are in place. In this very complex mosaic, or the pieces of the overall picture, it is important to ensure all components, and these practices that require approaches from local communities up to governments and regional approach need to develop such approach to protect land, environment, cultural heritage, and ensure development of.
Thank you, Asal,
for
the presentation about the importance of environment protection by the mining industry. I think anybody who visits and travel within Kyrgyzstan will be impressed by the spectacular landscape and the beauty of the nature in Kyrgyzstan. And I hope that mining companies, realize their responsibility about preserving such environments. And I'm sure, putting regulations and incentive in place for them would be is a good help. While I am the next, I will be presenting about. So my talk is about water resources in mining in Central Asia and the challenges ahead. I'll be first asking a question, why water management is so important for mining industry. And I will provide an overview of the water resources in Central Asia and a brief description of the context of climate change and the trend in water resource protection and regulations and the potential impact of climate change on water management in mining and also other amplifying factors. And I will discuss some potential way forward and conclusions. So water, it interacts with all aspects of mining, as you can see, from mine dewatering requirements to the mine stability, controlling inflow, mine design and planning, as well as some operation use in situ leaching. And the water supply is a big part as well of the water interaction with mining. Heap leach and tailings storage facilities requires a great deal of water management, as well as mining use of water treatment, discharge, and the impact on the environment. And without forgetting the impact on mine closure after the mine cease operations on water environment. I put in place this map just to illustrate the surface water and the complexity of the transboundary surface water system in Central Asia. I think the two main rivers, as you all know, are the Sirdarya River and the Omdarya River. Sirdarya originates in Kyrgyzstan and flow into Tajikistan, then Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan to end in the Aral Sea, while the Omdarya River originates in Tajikistan and part of it from even Afghanistan, and flows along the border with Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan and up in the Aral Sea. The other three transboundary rivers are the Ili River and the Irtysh River, which originate in China and flows into Kazakhstan. And the last one is the Ural River, which originates in Russia and flows into Kazakhstan. So this map really illustrates the complexity of the surface water systems. So water can become a source of conflicts and problems in Central Asia if not managed properly. So around 80% of water is used by agriculture in Central Asia. And mining sector and the rest of the industries use actually just about 14% of water resources. So mining sector use very little amount of water compared to agriculture, for example, and the misuse and loss of water resources in the agriculture is colossal, is estimated to about 40%. So, but that doesn't mean that the mining industry, because it uses less, it has a privilege, but rather than the reputation of mining industry is worldwide about water use and environmental impact is not really very flattering. And the Central Asian population has grown recently from 50 million in 1990 to 78 million recently, and expected to reach 104 million by 2050. And this will just increase the demand on energy and stress on water resources in future. And this will be exacerbated further by climate change. So when we talk about climate change, this means more regular floods, severe drought, and rising temperatures, and potential melting of glacier and permafrost, which will lead to some environmental disaster and great financial risks and social disorder and migration. So climate change will have significant impact on all sectors, including mining industry. In a recent study done by SRK on some mining in Kazakhstan, we have demonstrated the climate change is significant in Central Asia, with expected increase in temperature and change in precipitation pattern. So only few of mining projects, to our knowledge, has carried a climate change review and the potential impact on their operations. So more need to be done. So to tackle the climate change impact and ensure long-term sustainability, several agreements at international level have been put in place and ratified, such as the Paris Agreement. And this has been translated into local laws, such as the Climate Change Act in the UK. We have seen also ESG reporting and climate disclosure obligations, which have been adopted, such as the European Union directive relating to ESG and sustainability. And at country level, we have seen stringent regulations and tougher environmental permitting put in place to encourage sustainable use of water and prevent contaminations. An example is the Kazakh Environment Code of 2021, which also make provision for consideration of climate change as well as the ESG. Specific to mining industry, now we see that a full cycle approach is required by regulator, from the outlet of the project at exploration stage to the mine closure. And we have seen several strict standards being developed, such as the ICMM Global Industry Standard for Tailings Management, because of disasters that has taken place. And also water stewardship, which is an initiative that has been adopted by several mining companies as part of their sustainability and corporate and social responsibility policies. So if we see the International Energy Agency tracking of performance with regard to ESG, it says that the mining industry still has a long to go with regard to water consumption and discharge and protection of the environment. With regard to mining sector and climate change, it's a dilemma because the mining sector is impacted by climate change, but in return it will impact the climate change as well, because the mining is at the forefront for tackling climate change, because not only it needs to manage the water and energy use, but also drastic increase in production of copper, battery metals, and all the rare earth minerals needed for energy transitions are required, which should be supplied by the mining industry. So for this reason, mining sector is at a privileged or rather delicate positions. So on one hand, it should develop and operate sustainable way and deliver critical minerals for battery, for climate change solutions. And we can give an example of lithium, for example, and copper. The mines are used for, these minerals are used for renewable energy, but they are located usually in areas where there is water shortage, and the efficiency of water use and preservation is a must. We have seen this trend, for example, in Chile, where desalination plants have been, commissioned at a very high price to reduce water consumption. So adopting sustainable and responsible practice of our mining industry will not only preserve the water resources, but also it will bolster security and mineral supply to tackle the climate change. So when we talk about climate change and all the risk elements it involves, from frequent high magnitude storm, flood events, severe drought, and increase in evaporation, and the risk of melting of permafrost and glacier, this will lead to catastrophic results such as mine failures and failures of tailings storage facilities, or risk of mine flooding as well, and that can result in loss of human life and interruption, probably a loss of mine operation, as well as contamination of water resources downstream. So water shortage will also affect the water supply for mine operation, which is, it is a requirement for ore processing. So the shortage in water could affect mine plan and increase costs as well for the mining operations. It can also lead to conflict with other water users and potential restriction in permitting. With regard to evaporation, this can lead to even change in the ecosystem and in surface water bodies. For example, the water quality in lakes such as Balkhash lakes could become more brackish. And we can see, for example, Balkhash lake, on the east side of it is all brackish. So some operation can't even use that water because the quality is not good. And if evaporation increases because of climate change, this will obviously lead to more contamination and salinity in the lake. Some people will be surprised to know that there are permafrost and glaciers in the region which can be affected as well by climate change. And the melting of permafrost could lead to a great impact, severe impact on mine operations, such as increase in inflow, pore pressure, mine stability, and so on, and increase the cost. So there should be, tackling of instability, risk of instability of mines and investment in tackling climate change should be a priority for mining companies. Other amplifying factors, we have seen recently how many fatal incidents have happened, such as tailings failures, mine flooding, and pit slope failures. And this is an age of social media where ordinary people are more aware now of environmental risk, risk to human health and safety, and the need for environmental protections. And also investors are increasingly wary about environment protection and permitting requirements. So funding of mining projects are gonna require environment protection and more consideration of climate change. For the way forward, as some speakers have already talked about, at a country level, we have seen that change in regulations and have taken place to tackle climate change with development of research programs in Central Asia, and also preparation of public policies and adaptation to the climate change. Also, we have seen some agreements being put in place in Central Asia between countries for the water management to preempt potential conflicts. But also there is need for more wide catchment, water management, which involve various sectors, not just the mining, but should be collaboration with, for example, agriculture and other industry. And as we have seen, agriculture, water saving and protection in agriculture could lead to tripling probably the agricultural, potential of these countries. At sector and project level, I think mining companies should carry out audits of critical mining infrastructure that are, they are vulnerable to climate change, and they need to prepare adaptation measures. So one of the aspects is obviously the pit slope stability and risk management of flooding, dam breaks analysis and prevention, review of their water management plan and cost, and update of project water balance models taking into consideration the risks. The responsibility of mining projects, it's not just the mining companies, it's not just the government, but it involves all. And the cornerstone of an effective mine water management require a delicate balance between the interest of government, mining companies, and stakeholders. With regard to government, the responsibility is clear in developing appropriate regulations, providing monitoring, review, and necessary permit, and ensuring responsible use of water by mining companies. With regard to mining companies, being the investors, they have rights for legitimate profits, but they must also take into consideration need for environment protections. And with regard to environment organizations and stakeholders, they should engage in a more responsible way going forward. And to achieve this, more transparent reporting and information sharing is a must. With regard to government, from a consultant point of view, they should develop adequate regulations, review systems and procedures that are in place, and they should establish a fair and transparent system that reward the best practice by some mining companies and protect water resources. Also, they should provide necessary training and qualification for reviewers and define limited, and reasonable time frame for reviewing, for permitting, water use, and environmental protection and licensing. With regard to mining companies, they should carry out, sufficient investigations, data collection, analysis, and design work which is proportional to mining projects. Obviously, every mine project is different. And they should take the necessary precaution and measure to prevent flooding and failures of mine infrastructures. And also, they need to design and implement sustainable water management schemes and adopt transparent monitoring and reporting standards. They should also, develop some dynamic relationship with stakeholders because it's critical to their operations, and also make provision for project financing for unforeseen environmental damage, and update, and adopt, best practice. In conclusions, I think the usual water challenge in mining sector will only get greater and more difficult because of climate change, because we can see already a lack of highly skilled local resources and expertise. Also, long-term financial investment will be linked closely to ESG and green energy transition performance. Water management regulations are increasingly stringent, and we should expect only more monitoring and transparent reporting required. As a result, I think every mine should undertake a review of climate change risks to their operations. Cutting costs, this is very important, cutting costs at project design stage often costs dearly to mining companies, so you should avoid that, trying to cut costs at the design stage. Mining companies should invest in innovation, scientific research, and training for local experts and adopt industry best practice based on international standards. Thank you very much for your attention. And now our final speaker is Mr. Alexei Kutilin, Vice President of Capital Sales Ekana of FLS Smith. He will be talking about best available solution for mineral processing, enhancing productivity and sustainability. Please welcome.
Good day, dear ladies and gentlemen, participants of the forum. On behalf of my company and personally, I would like to welcome the MINEX forum in Central Asia and wish fruitful negotiations in the frame of forum. I also would like to thank the organizers and facilitators to present unique solutions, including our solutions of FLS, particularly the solutions to process natural resources and industry sector. My presentation will be in line with previous two speakers. Why? Because the risks or the challenges we face in mining sector, we often tell the following. According to statistics, the mining industry accounts for approximately 3% of global carbon emissions. 3% of the global electricity is used in processing of crushing and grinding ore. Mining is a water-intensive process. For example, it takes about 170 tons of water to produce 1 ton of copper, which is really high, much. Today, about 20% of all mines are located in areas with extreme water stress. Therefore, increasing demand for minerals coupled with declining ore grades increases environmental impacts and ecology. And often governments ask question, what to develop? Is it a tourism or mining? Well, obviously, it is clear both sectors ought to be progressed or developed, but mining must be safe, responsible, by applying the up-to-date and innovations and solutions, including recultivation of lands and depletion of reserves, reduction in ore content, and the need to ensure stable operation of enterprises. We have scarcity of resources. We can observe an decrease in ore, and it requires safer operations of any enterprise. In replying to those challenges, FLS has developed a strategy so-called Mission Zero, which enables the subsoil users in mining sector by applying modern technologies to achieve the following goals. By 2030, in particular, zero water waste, zero emissions, CO2, and zero energy waste when processing natural resources. Our strategy is focuses on applying new technologies developed by our company. We have developed so-called dry grinding technologies, so-called Mission Zero technologies. Our company attempted to reduce the environmental impact of any operation of any enterprise. First is crushing. Second is a dry crushing by low energy consumption. Third is enrichment, so-called flotation of rough grinding. And the last area we paid attention is the scheme provides energy saving up to 30%. Let me now elaborate more on our solutions we suggest. Next, of course, is the low environmental impact grinding cycle. Dry grinding reduces overall plant water requirements. Refusal of MPSI and grinding media in so-called mills, enabling saving up to 100,000 tons of CO2 equivalent per year. In particular, my company is developing a grinding, and our company is developing. The scheme provides energy saving, as I said, a circle grinding. We believe that it will improve the process and shift to dry technologies application, which in its turn to reduce general consumption of water resources at the cycle of grinding, at enriching or processing plants, mills, energy consumption, so-called ball type grinding or ball mills. And as I said earlier, it will ensure saving up to 20 or 30% compared to traditional MPSI mill schemes, standard schemes of grinding applied in the past in mining sector. Next stage is so-called eco enrichment. We apply flotation equipment of larger mineral particles, which makes it possible to reduce the grinding fineness during grinding, which can also be based on scientific or evidence-based data. Next is energy cost by grinding can be reduced by up to 30%. So we use flotation equipment before grinding materials at different plants or facilities of mining sector of the world. Our company tested it out successfully. According to FLS experts, eco-enrichment methods application in the future will reduce energy consumption at the stage of grinding up to 30%. Total energy consumption for flotation can be reduced up to 60%. According to the next solution, the next is so-called recycled process of water and tailings management. FLS suggests to review it as in an integrated manner, such called filtration equipment use, filtration at so-called press filters, application or use of storaging tails and its enrichment, the so-called tailing dams and reduce costs. According to FLS experts, this solution will help reduce water consumption during evaporation, helps storaging tails in complex areas, mountainous areas, return up to 90% of processed water to the enrichment process, or to recycle or to reuse up to 90% of water. And we all have seen the consequences may lead as an unsafe or unsecured use of tails organized through dams construction. Technological capacity of the company can help improving dry storage of grinding of materials and so on. On the slide you can see the solutions to waste filtered tails up to 37 million of solution for disposal of filtered tailings as the dry storage. High performance tailings filtration solution, and as a result of filtration 75 or 85 of solids are filtered from water, which is sent to circulation immediately. You can see the benefits of our Mission Zero technologies. It will reduce water resources consumption, reduce emissions of CO2, will be achieved through integrated application of those technological solutions. As a matter of principle, this is the end of my presentation, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Alexei, for this interesting talk. I think the challenge of climate change and the need for green energy transition is so great that it requires input from all actors. And it's great to see how, processing plant designers and manufacturers can contribute to this through innovations and technology. Thank you, everyone, for your presentations. I have a couple of questions before opening the floor to the audience. I'll start with a question to Luke. Luke, the carbon border adjustment mechanism, which is called CBAM, can you please talk to us about the implication of this on mining industry?
Thanks for that, Hussein. Yeah, certainly. So, for those of you that don't know, CBAM, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, is a part of the European Commission's regulatory package for the green transition in the EU. And essentially what it is a tax levied on the import of certain goods from hard-to-abate industrial sectors on the carbon intensity of the production, right? So it sounds quite abstract, but in absolute terms, essentially what it means is it's trying to put a price on the climate externality of industrial output in key import markets from the EU. It's levied on not everything, it's levied actually just on 6 goods just now. Those are cement, aluminium, hydrogen, electricity, steel and iron, and aluminium. I might have missed one or repeated one, but broadly speaking, those are the areas. And what it means for the mining sector is that we've heard some really interesting discussions on what's been done at the level of the mine project itself to minimize carbon emissions, to minimize water usage. And this is all really encouraging because essentially what it means for mines and mineral exporters in Central Asia that export to the European Union means that in the years to come, the climate rationale, the ESG rationale for improving the emissions efficiency of the mine will be complemented by a competitiveness rationale. Because so long as the emission intensity of those mineral products are higher than the standards set by the European Union, there will be a price put on those emissions. It's a price that will be paid by the importer, so be paid by the firm importing the goods, but essentially what it means is it will harm the competitiveness of certain hard-to-abate industrial exporters in Central Asia. And just to kind of wrap that up, just now when you look at Central Asia, it doesn't really actually affect many countries in an important aggregate level. But what it is it's an important signal of where the market is going with this. Increasingly what we will see is jurisdictions including this carbon intensity aspect of industrial production in trade-related regulation that will have an impact on competitiveness. So it redoubles the need to accelerate those types of investments that we've heard about today in lowering the carbon intensity of the pit. But also as we go forward, it does the same thing for power sector decarbonisation, because just now this levy is placed just on what we would refer to as Scope 1 emissions, so the emissions at the site of the mine itself. But that won't stay the case. In the years ahead, it will start to include Scope 2 emissions. So they'll start looking at, well, what's the carbon intensity of the power sector that is being used for this production. And then further ahead, it will look at Scope 3 emissions, right? So looking at the value chain, the processing, and looking at the carbon intensity of those processes as well. So it's something that I think really needs to be on the agenda when we're looking at the kind of types of investments that are necessary and what the rationale is for those investments going forward. I hope that was clear, and I can obviously pick up on any part of that.
Yeah, thanks, Luke. My next question is to you, Erlan. Obviously, we have seen the red flag about investing in coal mining. There's no way forward. But one would just wonder what will become of the operating mine, especially those who have hundreds of years of mineral resource. Do you have an idea?
I think that the past experience is telling us that they will be closed, and then experience of UK, for example, the ambassador also mentioned this this morning, that UK closed all its coal mines, and here I would just note that this transition from coal, it should be fair, and from that perspective, this initiative of just transition is very important, so that nobody is left behind, and this transition is happening in the very transparent manner, and it takes into account the needs of the people working currently on the coal mines. And from that perspective, I think that it is important, and as EBRD, for example, we are working in Kazakhstan, in other countries, where via supporting small and medium businesses, we can also help people to get another skills and be productive and being economically active in other sectors like small and medium-sized businesses, opening up new businesses, etc. So, or for example, in the Pavlodar region of Kazakhstan, there is the government is planning to open a big IT cluster. So, from that perspective, just to say that there is no future for coal, yes, but at the same time, the people who are working there, it is a very good and talent resource which can be used for the benefit of the economy, because these are the engineers. And even, for example, working on coal to gas project which we signed back in 2022, we were also taking into account that there will be a special training established which would help to re-educate people working at the coal-fired power plant to being able to operate gas-fired power plants, or to operate and work at the solar farms and the wind farms, where this expertise is still needed. Thank you.
So do you see, governments in the region putting sufficient and effective incentives and help for this transition for these mining companies?
I mean that it's never enough, probably. Yeah, everyone would be willing to see more incentives, and but at the same time, the most important that there is a political will, and that the government understands that this transition should be just.
Thank you very much, Yerlan. My next question is to Samat. I just think about how much potential is there for the mining sector to contribute to this carbon sequestration compared to other sectors.
Thank you for your question. The capacity is quite high. It's huge, actually. I would like to note that sequestration is a long-term storage and absorption of consumers and absorbent of the carbon, which is soil, plants, even the ocean. And why I'm calling here mining company to pay attention to this issue. And my colleague, Deputy Minister from the Ministry of Nature and Environmental Protection, Natural Resources, and Ms. Asil Raimkulova, she actually noted in her presentation quite well that in process of mining natural resources and useful elements, there is such factor called recultivation or rehabilitation. And in Central Asia, somehow quite many companies do not pay adequate or sufficient attention to this item, meaning not just recultivation and restoration of the area of the footprint where minerals are mined, but apart from that, attention to be paid to absorption and sequestration of carbon that will give additional plus to the companies, even just to meet ESG commitments or ESG standards. And they do not enough. But capacity is huge. Why I'm focused? I was focused on water resources. That's because when we talk about impact, if we take impact on soil, for example, that after a mining activity, at the soil extraction or in the process of drying of the soil, because it gets frozen and then gets the melt, and then over time, just when it gets dry, more fractures appear on the surface. Through that fractures on the surface, actually the carbon just goes out of the soil. Its emission. 1 hectare of pasture land in a natural natural plants and recovery, actually putting back plants on top of the soil allows to get 23 tons of carbon absorbed by this soil if covers back. So this is why I'm calling mining company to pay attention to this item, to sequestration of carbon, and to this topic, and particularly in the area of recultivation and restoration of mines. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that detailed answer. My next question is to Asel. The environment protection, as we all know, I think for mining industry, if we go back 15, 20 years, I think it has been more of a hurdle for mining companies rather than taking it as initiative and dealing with it up front. But now things have changed, and the environment protection regulations have increased, but especially funding, of mining projects with the conditions of environment protections. But it's a complicated and complex subject. I think, we can't just work with the stick. You need to have the carrot. And I think what kind of incentives, the government put in place for good students, for, encouraging mining companies to protect the environment and just within the mining industry while still getting profit.
Thank you for your question. That's a very interesting question that you asked. Yes, the government does use certain measures on improvement of legislation in this regard. In particular, I can tell you about, say, for example, take one issue of waste or of processing, or now government is working on the following. We now put a wider responsibility of producers. Like if a company, enterprise, is using or producing in their activity certain waste, and if the waste is processed and utilized, and now we are implementing utilization fees, and if companies processing that fees, they will not pay. I mean, this utilization fee will not apply to those who is working on processing and manage their waste properly. So this is one of the incentives. And some things we put into legislation. For example, currently we are decreasing types of licenses, number of permits, and types of permits decrease. We simplify and facilitate procedures. As I noted in my presentation, all paperwork, all documentations, all that state review, which is expertise, or licensing and permits are done through the single window. It's a one-stop shop approach. So of course, but you rightly noted that it's not only a stick is required just from government action, but and carrot as well. So we are working in this area, not only waste and dumps and piles, but on other issues. Say, for example, air quality issue. Air quality. Those companies and enterprises which buy equipment, and there are certain equipment that could improve air quality. We have more specific loans for the company, concessional loans.
Thank you very much, Asel. And now my last question before giving opportunity to the audience is to Alexei. Alexei, can you provide us with some examples of mining operations where your technology and approach has been used, and how much impact it has on, preservation of energy and water? Thank you very much. Спасибо, очень хороший вопрос.
Thank you. Very good question. As the case, one of the main example, I can bring one of our main client, a customer at Kazakhstan territory, Kaz Minerals company. Three recent Tagay 2 fields were actually built on the full Schmidt technology. Tagay 2 company. There was a special with the paste of thickening that allows to return more water and get harder, 60% harder stuff. And there is also limitations in Kazakhstan. And so the water, energy resources, MOP3, where technology of full Schmidt is already applied as a dry crushing and HEP jar technology used. Now, speaking about global experience, there is a very positive technology of high pressure units that allow to get higher pressure technology of more higher level of crushing and pulverizing, which actually contributes to the cost of energy and decreasing cost of the product. That's actually already happening. And now this is a tendency which is up to date.
Thank you, Alexei. I'm sorry, I'm told that due to time limitation, we will not have opportunity to ask questions from the audience, but please don't hesitate to approach and talk and ask questions to our distinguished speakers. So thank you, everyone, for these sessions, and bon appetit for lunch. Thank you.
Thank you.